So earlier today, I watched the Mr. Plinkett review for Star Wars The Last Jedi over on Red Letter Media's channel. Of course, I'm sure almost everybody watching this has seen that review and knows about Mr. Plinkett. And if you don't, I mean, where do I start? I guess if you don't know about Mr. Plinkett, watch the Star Wars prequels reviews, which is really the videos that got Red Letter Media on the map when you really think about it with the mainstream, and you'll know kind of the story. But I wanted to address some of the things that were brought up in the Last Jedi Plinkett review that I really think need to be addressed, and things that I find really fascinating and cool. So one thing I was worried about going into this Last Jedi Plinkett review, like I knew they were going to do a review for the film. I knew it would be sometime in 2018, didn't know exactly when. I was thinking more towards the end of the year, but no, it already came out. And one of the things I was thinking about is, are they going to be able to really lampoon the movie any more than it's already been lampooned? Are they going to be able to make fun of the movie? Which is kind of funny because the video they made has National Lampoon's Vacation. So the word lampoon was prevalent. It's all over that video. But I was wondering how they were going to be able to talk about things that hadn't been talked about before. And they actually addressed it in the video. They were saying that, essentially, Mr. Plinkett was saying that millions of other channels already covered Last Jedi to death and talked about all the good and the bad. So they really put focus on things that other channels really didn't put focus on. The majority of them, that is. And one of the things they really focused on was how sloppy the script was for this movie. Now, one thing I did like is that I felt like Red Letter Media was very fair to Rian Johnson. They talked about how he comes off like a bit of a high school kid who he kind of does, but he comes off like a guy who didn't really try to make a bad movie. He tried to make a good movie, but he tried to get too cute with it, which is something I've been saying forever. I don't think he came out here and purposely intended to make a good movie. Intended to make a bad movie. I think he actually thought that Last Jedi would work to the majority of Star Wars fans. I think he actually did believe, despite that interview where he said he liked his movies to be loved and hated, I think he actually did believe that a movie where they constantly have subversions over and over again would work, and it just doesn't work for Star Wars. And Mr. Plinkett pointed out something that I really loved about his review. Is he talked about how, Red Letter Media talked about how Star Wars is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be an adventure. That's what they want. That's what people want. And Last Jedi just didn't feel like that. Even Force Awakens, which has gotten a lot of crap, did feel like an adventure. Less so than the original trilogy, but it still felt that way. Whereas Last Jedi just was very dreary. And one of the things that Plinkett pointed out that I wanted to discuss was just how bad the final act of the film is and how unnecessary it is. He says in the review that the movie should have been an hour and 45 minutes, and the cliffhanger should have been when Kylo tries to seduce Rey. And I agree, that would have been a good cliffhanger, but then if they did that, they would have had to start Episode 9 right after Episode 8 to satisfy that cliffhanger. So I don't know if it would have worked the same way, but either way, I see where they're coming from. But one thing that's been pointed out time and time again is that the movie does tend to be very lazy with what it says. That's why I don't understand when people say things like, oh, this movie's the only Star Wars film that actually makes sense. Well, it really doesn't. It actually contradicts itself many, many times. For example, Luke Skywalker wanting to burn down the Jedi text, and then when Yoda does it, he freaks out. But you were just going to burn them. And all of a sudden, now he's like, that stuff doesn't make any sense. One thing that I love they pointed out, which I actually asked this question on Twitter months ago, and nobody can give me a straight answer, is how the hell did Rey end up back on the Millennium Falcon? How did the Millennium Falcon light speed in, drop off Rey, happen to get her right within tractor beam range, and then light speed out? Where did Chewbacca go? How did Chewbacca come back? When did Rey end up in the Falcon? Did Rey, leave on Snoke's ship, Hux said, and then find Chewie? How does she communicate with Chewie? All that stuff, I was wondering, I'm not saying that movies have to give away everything, because obviously as a filmmaker you don't want to tell every single second of every story, and you don't want to focus too much on one thing when you have something else going on. I totally understand that you didn't have to show Rey and how she got there, but the actual time in the movie, right? How much time is going by, how much time passes, is kind of problematic. And actually Empire Strikes Back had the same problem, okay? As much as I love that film, that had a very similar issue. We don't know how much time there is from when the transports from, the Resistance actually, leave the ship to when they land on, the salt planet. We don't actually know how long it is before they land on Canto Bight. And it's interesting because with that kind of in our heads, I assume it didn't take them that long to get the walkers down there, but how long did it take them? Because that almost feels like that last act, when they're on Canto Bight, it almost feels like it takes place like, hours after the fight, earlier with, Finn and, Phasma and that whole thing. It feels that way, but it doesn't make sense because, they have the whole crash landing of Finn and Rose. So again, when did, Rey have a chance to actually land on the planet and find Chewie, or did they meet up in space, or what? Like, I don't understand that. And he pointed out how sloppy the damn script is. And it is sloppy. It's very, very sloppy. Now, another thing they pointed out that I loved was how Rian Johnson almost gave too much time to all the subplots versus focusing on an A plot, a B plot, and a C plot. Now, this did make a lot of sense to me because a lot of folks have talked about how they spent too much time on Canto Bight. And actually, I think they spent too much time on that whole, like, Holdo, storyline with the, let's not listen to this person and, that whole thing. They spent too much time on the Holdo subplot with Leia being knocked down and whatnot. I agree with that as well. And it's interesting when you think about it because, again, the idea of them doing 3 subplots, like a 3C plot, so to speak, it's not inherently a terrible idea. And what I mean by that is it just depends on how it's done, because I think it worked out very effectively in another movie, like, for example, Avengers Infinity War. Avengers Infinity War had 3 and at one time even 4 different plots going on at once, and it all worked out fine. And the movie was set up sort of like vignettes where you had this, then you go over to this person, you go to that person, you go to this person. I thought it was very well structured, very well crafted, but that only works, I think, in a film that is so huge like Infinity War that you have to give all the actors and all the characters enough screen time. With Last Jedi, it wasn't that they were trying to put together all these different superstars like in the MCU. They were adding characters. They were adding people like Holdo. They were adding people like Rose, which were not in Episode 7 and didn't even need to be in this movie, because they could have done the exact same thing, consolidated both plots and let Finn and Poe do the mission instead of it being Finn and Rose. It's almost like Rose is just thrown in just because they wanted a new character. Again, there's that whole thing about the Asian market, which I don't really think that's the case, but it could be. And they pointed out in the video that it didn't do well in China, which was one of the big stories, and people were trying to downplay it, saying, oh, that's okay, this and that. I mean, it's really not okay, because they've been trying to get the Star Wars property over in China for a while, and it just hasn't worked out, and this movie didn't help things. I did like also how the Plinkett character didn't really fall into fanboy territory at all, and did become more of an analyst. And during their actual review, he's talking about how, the fans wanted this and the people wanted that. And he wasn't really saying we wanted, like Red Letter Media or the Plinkett character or just the hardcore fans. He was saying the people. And I like that because he's not necessarily putting himself into a category here. Because the Last Jedi movie has people who love the movie to death and those who hate it. And Plinkett was more like, well, I mean, these people wanted this. And the reality is they did. I mean, I think even if you like Last Jedi, I think most Star Wars fans expected Luke to kick some ass in this movie and not just be a hologram. And we didn't get that. And that did bother a lot of people, and rightfully so. I mean, you've been waiting so many years to see Luke come back, and he doesn't do anything except for become a hologram. Like, it doesn't work for a lot of people. It works for some, doesn't work for all. And I like the fact that they discuss how Rian Johnson, essentially we've been saying for months, he was trying to purposely be too cute with the movie and screw around with the audience and not give any attention to, things that other fans would give attention to. Like they mentioned, of course, Admiral Akbar's death. Now, I thought that a lot of the Plinkett review was very tongue-in-cheek because we know from Red Letter Media that they are fans of the original trilogy, but Mike from RLM is a self-professed Star Trek fan, so of course there's going to be Star Trek comparisons as far as the military decisions that were made in this movie that were kind of boneheaded. And he did talk about how one of the problems with the film, and he compared it to, really Chevy Chase's Vacation film, which I loved, is that the movie comes off like every character is dumb. They're making dumb decisions. And he talked about how the difference between making a bad decision and overcoming an obstacle is 2 different things. Characters characters are constantly being stupid, both good characters and bad characters. They're both acting like idiots throughout the entire film, and they end up paying for it. And that's just kind of lazy writing. It's lazy writing. It's not an obstacle that you have to put in front of somebody. It's just more so them being stupid. You know, Luke tries to warn Rey about Kylo, and she just blows him off, even though she has no experience in the Force at all, and he does, and she goes and winds up realizing that Kylo's still going to be a prick, even after Snoke is dead. So Luke was right the entire time. You know, and that's just one example. You know, they don't find the code breaker, so they rely on some random dude who was in jail, right, who was in jail, who they just found, some random shady snake guy who even sounds like a snake, and they're like, okay, we can trust this guy. Like, it's true, though. Like, it's true that the entire future of the galaxy on the line, they're trusting some random dude they found in a jail cell. And, of course, it's okay for characters to make dumb decisions once in a while, but it is a recurring thing. And he talks about how he feels like Rian Johnson tried to make a comedy. And it's true, when you look at the deleted scenes, you know, the whole biting thing and the scene with the stormtrooper were so cringy. I mean, Rian Johnson's just not a very good comedian. And really, I like the review a lot. Do I wish he would have tore into the movie a bit more? Maybe, but everybody else already has. So they wanted to make it different, and I think it worked out. And it did bring to light things that I have discussed before on Twitter, but I don't know if I've made videos on. And trust me, I've made a lot of videos about Last Jedi. And one of the things I did talk about is how sloppily written that movie was. And people just seem to ignore that, you know, and just go on with their lives and say it's a great film and not even point out all the writing errors because they're so happy that Rey has no parents and they're so happy that Luke is a pacifist all of a sudden. It's pretty stupid. And again, if you like that movie, that's fine, but at least acknowledge its flaws. It definitely has a lot of issues, and no matter what, it hurt the fandom big time. It hurt the Star Wars fandom big time. Anyways, that's it. Let me know what you thought about the Plinkett review. They're all good. I mean, they're all funny. But let me know what you think. And yeah, we'll see where Han Solo stands on the Plinkett radar when that comes out, probably at the end of the year or sometime next year. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see y'all soon.